Donald Trump intensifying his violent rhetoric. Surprise. Seemingly threatening a, quote, bloodbath if he doesn't win in 2024.
A bloodbath? Bloodbath if he loses in November.
A bloodbath. Sometimes a bloodbath means a bloodbath.
What does that mean? He's going to exact a bloodbath? There's something wrong here.
Yes, there's definitely something wrong, and it's with some of the big TV networks and newspapers which appear to have been caught lying about Donald Trump's use of the term bloodbath. They insist he meant the phrase literally, but his supporters and even some of his biggest critics on the left say he's clearly using an economic metaphor. Our panel is similarly split on this story, but before we hear from them, here's some of the coverage so you can decide for yourself.
Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country.
He was definitely sending a call to his supporters to have a reprise of January 6th.
This is violence, violence, violence. Donald Trump is promoting and endorsing and encouraging political violence.
A major party candidate is saying, you elect me, there's going to be dictatorship, bloodbath, violence, retribution against my political enemies. That equals what we saw in Italy and Germany and other places.
When he says bloodbath, he means it literally.
This was not some meandering off-message comment. This is his message.
Why let the facts get in the way of a good story?
It's actually important to highlight how not just inaccurate, but it's just deceptive the media was in their depiction of what he said, and that they are taking this quote out of context and trying to say that there's going to be a civil war if he doesn't get elected, which is not what he was talking about at all. See, pull it up.
Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. Now, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars.
It's so disturbing that they would, first of all, that they would think that they could get away with it in this day and age with all the scrutiny and all the, with social media and all the independent journalists that exist now.
This particular case, he was clearly talking about tariffs. He said it in an economic context. Not guilty.
Bloodbath. There's going to be a bloodbath. And I mean that in a literal way. A bath all full of blood. And anyone who's ever said bloodbath must literally mean bath full of blood. There's a little thing in this world called context.
The legacy media types they're done. They're so done. It's happened so fast.
Have we reached peak Trump derangement syndrome? Pretty close. If you have nothing to say, bend the other guy's words.
Trump did have a surprising defender.
The president was clearly talking about the impact of imports devastating the American automotive industry.
I get a feeling American people increasingly don't trust American media titles.
The word bloodbath, and all of the people that are complaining about it, they all used it. It's a commonly used phrase when you're getting slaughtered economically.
That's the sort of language that occurs constantly in American politics. In fact, here's a montage of Democrats using the word bloodbath.
The word bloodbath and massacre come up frequently.
The Republican Party will be destroyed. It's going to be a bloodbath.
There's going to be a bloodbath one way or the other.
Bloodbath for Bernie Sanders.
It's been a bloodbath. They're shaping up to be a bloodbath.
Head off a bloodbath in next year's crucial midterm.
24 hours later.
Well, the fake news media is at it again.
After the full context was made apparent to the Trump critics, they doubled down.
He knew what he was doing. We're not stupid. Americans aren't stupid. He was talking about a bloodbath. Sometimes a bloodbath means a bloodbath.
Bloodbath, a major economic disaster.
The term we use these days is dog whistle.
Donald Trump is more dangerous today than at any point in his life.
When Donald Trump predicts there will be a bloodbath in this country, you should take that for what it is, a Trump prediction.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
The Biden campaign accused the former president of threatening violence.
It's clear the guy wants another January 6th.
Now other people my age see it differently. The American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution, that's not me.
Let's bring in our panel now, and today we're joined by the Democrat politician Brandon Potter, journalist Jenny Holland, and the founder of Roca-News Billy Carney. Welcome to all three of you. Brandon, I'd like to start with you. What do you think Trump meant when he said bloodbath?
Well, I think it's very clear what he meant. It's another example of him telegraphing the fact that he's comfortable promoting and inciting political violence if he doesn't get his way. When people are talking about the context of how to take anything that Donald Trump says, I think you should take it in the entirety of the context. This is a president who refused to commit to the peaceful transfer of power. This is somebody who told his supporters to march down to the Capitol and fight like hell on January 6th, or they wouldn't have a country anymore, which turned deadly. Cops were beaten, and his supporters chanted to hang the vice president. So when you have somebody who has a long history of promoting and inciting political violence even before January 6th, this is a guy who told Second Amendment people they might be able to stop Hillary Clinton, that he wanted protesters at his rallies to be beaten, punched in the face, and taken out on stretchers, and offered to pay people's legal bills, and most recently said that the General Mark Milley should be executed for treason. I think it's very clear what he means. We should take him literal, we should take him serious, and we should recognize the clear and present danger that Donald Trump is to Western democracy, and that he's somebody who is very comfortable promoting political violence in his quest to be a dictator and a wannabe autocrat.
Jenny Holland, Brandon there making a lengthy argument that Donald Trump should be taken literally when he says there'll be a bloodbath if he isn't elected.
Yeah. Well, I mean this in the nicest possible way, but I think Representative Potter sounds like one of the few people who still watches CNN, and the context in which he is creating, or which he is repeating, is essentially a figment of CNN and MSNBC's imagination. I do think there is an argument, a good faith argument to be made that Trump is hyperbolic and crass in his language, and that it's a very fair argument to say that makes him unpresidential. But let's not forget that he was president for 4 years, and there wasn't, despite media attempts to make up stories about it, there wasn't a crackdown on political opposition. A lot of the things that he uses as an example, for example, the January 6th speech, I watched that speech live, and he did. I'm not a huge Trump fan. I can assure you, his intent was not to say, "Go attack the Capitol, storm it with pitchforks." In fact, he said, "Everyone go home and go home peacefully." I think that the media, the mainstream corporate media, has been doing a huge disservice to the American population and to democracy itself by continuing this vendetta, this sort of spiteful and rather immature vendetta against Trump, who, yes, is a controversial and polarizing figure, but isn't the crazed, bloodthirsty dictator they so desperately want him to be. And that has literally been proved by the fact that he was actually president for 4 years, and nobody was taken away to camps. Nobody was thrown in prison, unlike a lot of political opposition to the Democratic establishment currently, which has actually come under a lot of sustained lawfare and jail time under the Biden administration.
Billy Carney, can I ask, how did your news organization report the story?
We typically stay away from the DC food fight, but seeing our phones blow up last weekend kind of gave us the impetus to look into it. I mean, across the kind of left spectrum of media, you had these headlines saying Donald Trump calls for bloodbath if he loses the election. And I think naturally you read that and you assume he's calling for people to take up pitchforks and go out and stab their neighbors, when in actuality it was within the context of the auto industry. So we laid out those headlines, from The Guardian to the New York Times. Then we presented Trump's actual minute-long speech of what he said in that context, and then actually showed the media doubling down on it later. And what I imagine happened is that these organizations put out these initial headlines, saw they were driving traffic, and then just went for more. And when you have these kind of perverse business models where these companies are built on making money off clicks to drive advertising revenue or increase subscriptions, you get problems like this. And at the end of the day, the big issue that's going to happen here is if a politician comes out and actually directly calls for violence and says, take up your arms and move, the media is going to report it and nobody's going to believe them. We have a boy who cried wolf scenario.
Brandon, do you accept that if you use this as a pretext to attack Trump, take him out of context, if something really bad like this is actually happening, that the American public won't know who to believe?
No, because we've already seen it happen here in America. I mean, despite what Jenny said, when Donald Trump was president, he refused to commit to a peaceful transition of power. He knew that he lost an election. He rallied a mob of his supporters to the Capitol. He told them to march down to the Capitol and fight like hell, or they wouldn't have a country anymore. They breached the Capitol. They assaulted cops. One of his supporters was murdered, was killed, I should say, by a Capitol police officer defending the Speaker of the House at that point. And they chanted to hang the vice president. How many more examples do you need to see of Donald Trump inciting political violence? All of the examples that I gave happened either before he was elected or during his stay in the presidency.
Jenny, just quickly. Jenny?
Yeah. But all of those examples that you give, you're giving them through the filter of what the media reported, what the corporate mainstream media reported.
I'm looking at when you say they, what I observed with my own eyes and heard with my own ears.
Yeah.
He told his supporters to march to the Capitol and fight like hell.
But you're missing a key word, Brandon. He said to go down there peacefully. Why are you missing that word out? No, Jenny, 1 second. Brandon, why are you missing out part of the story that would paint the president in a better light?
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Well, I'm not missing out part of the story. I'm taking the entire story. He then sat there for hours as he watched the Capitol get breached, as he watched on television cops get assaulted.
And he put a message out to say, go home. And then the people, well, they took it down, didn't they? Why did the people who control the social media take it down, do you think?
Took what down? His speech?
Took down his message, in front of the White House saying, go back home, go home in peace. Why did they take it down then? Yeah, come in.
I don't know what you're referring to exactly. I believe they took his entire social media account down because they were worried about him continuing to incite political violence.
Jenny, come in.
Donald Trump genuinely and truly believed, as do many, many other people, that the election was tampered with and there was election interference. He was telling his supporters to fight like hell, to continue to put forward their argument to that the election was not legitimate. That continues to be a debate that rumbles on, that is far from settled, okay? The problem with Democrats in general, and I say this as someone who, until recently, only ever voted for a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I am not really a Democrat. I consider myself an independent. The problem with the Democratic establishment is that they have such bad Trump derangement syndrome that they literally cannot hear the words that come out of the man's mouth in any other way than the worst possible light.
We've covered that. Brandon's argument is essentially that narrow context might be in Trump's favor, but the wider context of remarks that he has made inciting violence means that he is an outlier amongst his contemporaries in politics today. But Brandon, I would say that if you looked at his contemporaries, people like Joe Biden, Maxine Waters, and Nancy Pelosi, they are guilty of saying things also which can be quite incendiary. For example, Biden was actually using violent rhetoric in 2018 when he said he would beat the hell out of Donald Trump. Then we've got Maxine Waters encouraging physical intimidation of political opponents in 2018, saying if you see anyone from Trump's cabinet in a restaurant, a department store, gasoline station, get out, cause a crowd, push back on them, tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. And then we have Nancy Pelosi in the same year, 2018, saying, I just don't know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. And maybe there will be. I mean, you can take people out of context and make them look bad, can't you?
You certainly can. And that is what I think you're doing by putting those statements in a very narrow context. They are taking out of a broader context. I don't agree with a lot of that. I don't agree that we should have and promote a civil discourse process where people are out in restaurants and they get surrounded. I don't think that that's conducive to a healthy democracy. But Joe Biden, Maxine Waters haven't been saying, Second Amendment people, maybe you're the only ones who can stop my political opponent.
Yeah, I think you'll find, though, that Hillary Clinton and the entire Democrat establishment, none of them were prepared to say that Trump won the election legitimately. They all implied that there was Russian collusion, and Maxine Waters called him an illegitimate president. Let me ask you about the Democrat Party reaction to this clip, the Bloodbath clip, okay? It seems like the Democrats are coordinating with the mainstream media. Look at the Biden-Harris campaign press release, if we can bring that up for a minute. It says, tonight, Donald Trump said there would be a bloodbath if he wasn't elected, and that if he lost, there would be no more elections, okay? Now let's have a look at this Biden-Harris video, campaign video, official video. You probably won't believe it, but they released the video of the bloodbath clip and then edited it next to neo-Nazis chanting, Jews will not replace us, and Trump saying there's fine people on both sides. Let's have a listen.
Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath. And it's going to be a bloodbath for the country.
Jews will not replace us!
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Are you willing to condemn white supremacists and militia groups?
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Please rise for the horribly and unfairly treated January 6th hostages.
There'll be a lot of pardons and commutations of January 6th defendants.
Yes, absolutely.
Tell your supporters now, no matter what, no violence.
And it's going to be a bloodbath.
Brandon, that is an official clip released by the Biden-Harris campaign. What do you make of it?
So what you're referring to in Charlottesville?
No, I'm referring to the Biden-Harris clip in which they've juxtaposed the former president of the United States with neo-Nazis.
Right, who he then called very fine people.
You really think so? You really think so? Okay.
Jews will not replace us.
Okay, so it's not irresponsible for the Biden-Harris campaign to put that out?
Absolutely not. I think it would be irresponsible to not paint Donald Trump in the light of the clear and present danger he is to Western democracy and how comfortable he is promoting and encouraging political violence with the long history he has of it. I think it would be irresponsible for them not to.
Fair enough. Jenny, what did you make of it?
Well, I mean, I have so little respect or faith in the Biden-Harris administration that nothing they could ever say would shock me. However, I'd just like to ask Brandon, you know, if Trump was such a threat to democracy, how come Joe Biden is in power now? If he was a dictator, how come Joe Biden is in power now? You know, your people in the Democratic Party are they desperately need Trump to be this boogeyman because their policies have completely failed the United States. And it's increasingly obvious, even to former Democrats like myself. I really just, the lengths that people go to justify their fear of this man, who, again, you don't have to like, you don't have to agree with, you don't have to think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but he is not the second coming of Adolf Hitler. If that had been the case, Joe Biden wouldn't be sitting in the White House right now.
Okay, Brandon, just a quick question. I think what Brandon would say is that it's a testimony to the strength of American institutions that Trump wasn't able to overthrow the election. You're nodding, Brandon, so I guess we agreed on that. Quick question. People will say it's one thing for Trump, even if you believe that he meant bloodbath, it's one thing for Trump to promise or threaten a bloodbath, but take a look at Joe Biden. As president of the United States, he's actually funded one, or a genocide in Gaza. Who's worse?
I think that's a very fair point. I am very much opposed to what Israel has done in Gaza. I think, of course, with anything in a complicated geopolitical foreign policy space, there's a balance. I think Israel has a right to defend themselves against Hamas, but what we have seen there has been very much to the extreme. And I very much hope that we have a ceasefire immediately.
Well, stay with us. Well, as we've heard, the mainstream media are losing viewers and readers, while independent content creators are growing rapidly. It's a big change from the good old days.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening.
There was a time when a few big TV networks and papers formed a news oligopoly, and we, the viewers and readers, had nowhere else to go. You'd have to tune in at a certain time to catch the news.
This is the 10 o'clock news.
These are the world headlines at this hour.
Hello, I'm Bryson Reich, and I'd like to welcome you to WRC TV.
The newsreaders were legends in their own right. Credible, reliable, authoritative.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
Good evening.
Now, if you're under 30, you may not have experienced this era, but it really did exist. But then, cable news came along in the early 80s.
Good evening, I'm David Walker.
And I'm Lois Hart. Now here's the news.
And it turns out there was some appetite for news 24 hours a day.
Few broadcasts take any chances these days, and most are very politically correct.
The cable news networks took market share from the traditional networks and did very well, especially during Trump's first run for office, during his tenure, and then peaking around the 2020 election.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media.
But then came TV's equivalent of narcolepsy, Joe Biden, and it all got a bit boring, perhaps because the major networks all agreed with what the US president was trying to do. Nevertheless, the ratings fell, and not just the ratings, also trust. Last year, polling indicated that half of all Americans no longer trusted national news organizations. Fox News remains the most popular news channel, and that's thanks to a loyal but aging audience who still enjoy their news on television. Younger people between the ages of 18 and 49 very rarely watch their news on television. So where are they all going? Online, of course.
I am just a guy in my kitchen on a laptop, and my average YouTube video is probably about 280,000 views.
Individual commentators like Mark Dice are as big, or in some cases even bigger, than entire networks. For example, Ben Shapiro has 6.84 million followers on YouTube. Russell Brand has 6.79 million. Mark Dice himself, literally one person releasing authentically lo-fi videos at home, has 1.86 million. And then there are figures who used to be on TV and are now doing very, very well online only. Piers Morgan has 2.47 million followers on YouTube. Tucker Carlson close behind him with 1.8 million.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight.
Or the thunderstorm.
They may have made their names on more traditional forms, but now they're enjoying a lot of success online. This is, however, not a level playing field. YouTube, owned by Google, prioritizes so-called authoritative news sources, usually the big news channels. And yet independent creators tend to get far more views per video than the big networks who have billion-dollar budgets. What does that tell you?
The traditional media traffic has absolutely plummeted, has fallen off a cliff. The traditional media companies, they are dying. People don't care anymore.
Billy, tell us a story of why you established Roca-News. What was frustrating you that you wanted to set up your own news network?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for years, trust in mainstream media has declined. And I think that was really exacerbated by the pandemic and everything that was going on both sides of the aisle to either extreme. So we saw two big issues with media as it stood a few years ago when we founded Roca-News. One issue was that the actual content was irrelevant to the younger audience. For instance, most of the coverage nowadays is on this DC food fight. There's so many interesting stories outside of politics that can be covered, and they can be delivered in a cool and interesting way. And that's kind of the second part of why we started Roca. Beyond the content, the actual form of articles has not evolved in the past 100 years. Sure, you've taken newspapers and digitized them by just putting the article online, but it's the same exact process. And so we wanted to make that process of reading an article and retaining information more enjoyable. So we've done it on social media. We have a daily newsletter. Now we've built an app that kind of gamifies that news process, similar to how Duolingo gamifies language learning. So you can read articles, play games about the news, and compete with your friends in order to get a better understanding of what's going on without kind of having to sit through the old guard's way of reading 1,000 words at a time.
And you've managed to get something like 1.2 million followers on your Instagram page. Why do you think people are flocking to your site there?
I think beyond us delivering content that they want, it's a very convenient way to do it, and it's a way that's familiar to them. So the way we make our content for Instagram is that we make it as if it is any other post on Instagram. So you scroll through Instagram, what are you seeing? You're seeing pictures from your friends, you're seeing videos that people put up, that influencers put up, you're seeing memes. So one thing that we do on our daily news is we have a meme cover that you'll see sliding through the Instagram feed, and you swipe through it and you just get bullet point summaries of each story. And that way of doing news hadn't really been done. You can kind of call to the New York Post and the covers that they've made throughout the years, which have become a staple of the newspaper. And so, I think adapting the things that have worked in media and applying them as with the first principles approach to operating online is how we've hit that nail on the head. And we also make content as founders that we ourselves would enjoy. And given that we are our own target audience, that 18 to 30-year-old male demographic, we make content that we'd enjoy, and as a result, our audience ends up enjoying it as well.
Brandon, I appreciate that you still have faith in MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, and so on. I'm just wondering, you heard Billy there saying that there's been a precipitous decline in Americans' trust of the mainstream media. Do you accept that stories like the Bloodbath one are actually doing them a lot of harm, their credibility and their ratings?
Well, I think it does a lot of harm to have it covered in a very polarized way. I think what we've seen is this media landscape shift away from traditional journalism that actually reported the news objectively to now moving more towards models that are highly focused on monetizing clicks and views by selling preferred content to a particular target audience. It's what creates these very polarized, distinct echo chambers, and it's really what breaks down the free market of ideas being exchanged and having open, healthy debate to come to large, broad consensus among the public.
Jenny, just a final question. We heard Jordan Peterson in that package saying that that the legacy media is finished. Do you think it is?
Yes, and I certainly hope it is. And I say that because they've done such a poor job in the biggest stories of the last 5 to 10 years. And I think they've caused more harm than good. And I say that with a lot of regret, having worked in legacy media, in the newspaper business. But I just don't see how they can genuinely call themselves objective in any way any longer.
Jenny Holland, Billy Carney, and Brandon Potter, thank you all very much today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus, TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.